Donald Trump's weaponization of the Justice Department continues in a big way. NBC News is reporting that the FBI's Washington field office is folding its federal public corruption squad. That's according to 3 people familiar with the matter. It happens to be the very same unit that worked on Jack Smith's special counsel investigation into Donald Trump. The field office has 3 units that work on public corruption issues, but this one, known internally as CR-15, was deeply involved in the Bureau's Arctic frost investigation, which was the precursor to the Jack Smith probe into efforts to overturn the 2020 election results by Donald Trump and his allies. So that investigation resulted in one of the 2 federal criminal cases against Donald Trump, both of which were dropped after he won the election in November. Earlier this year, the Justice Department slashed its public integrity section, which had also worked on public corruption cases. Members of the unit had also resigned after refusing to sign off on dropping the federal corruption case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams.
Yo guys, welcome back to another John podcast episode. A newly released nonpartisan Watchdog report, documented and sourced, paints one of the most detailed pictures of government corruption in modern American history. While the volume of stories from this administration has made it hard to track any single revelation, this one stands apart as a case file built by legal professionals, not political operatives. But I am asking you to stick with me because this one is different. Here is exactly why. A watchdog group called the Campaign Legal Center, a nonpartisan organization that has spent years tracking money, politics, and government ethics, just published what they are calling a tracker. Not a report that gets published once and disappears into the internet somewhere. Not a one-time press release that gets a day of coverage and then fades into nothing. A tracker, a live, updated, running catalog of what they are calling the most egregious cases.
Here's how one former Justice Department official puts it, quote, "This is yet another sign that it's open season for political corruption. The administration gutted the public integrity section, neutered the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., and is now shuttering the FBI's preeminent federal public corruption squad. This isn't what voters had in mind when they heard drain the swamp." We're back with Andrew and Melissa. Melissa, this was telegraphed, but to see it put in motion and dismantled is still staggeringly shocking.
You're shocked? I'm not shocked by this.
I mean, it's amazing that the government would say we're not going to do this anymore. It's sort of a basic government function. And for Trump to corrupt and grift, but say he's still against corruption is actually more Trumpy than to corrupt and grift and actually get rid of the enforcement mechanism for catching other people in acts of corruption.
I'm not at all surprised by this. They said they were going to do this. They've been very clear and telegraphing what they are going to do.
Where the administration has given official government benefits to wealthy donors and political supporters. They published it with names attached, timelines, and connections from the money to the favor, case by case by case. It is being updated in real time as new cases emerge. Think about that for a second. The volume of alleged corrupt transactions is so high that the Watchdog built a dedicated live updating tool just to keep track of them all. We are talking about jobs, high-level government positions with real power and real influence over policy. We are talking about ambassadorships handed out to people who, by any normal standard, had no business being in those roles. We are talking about pardons, actual pardons, the most powerful legal tool a president has, that lined up with political money in ways that are, to put it very generously, suspicious.
This isn't just about neutering the FBI's public corruption unit. It's about neutering the DOJ as an enforcement mechanism to enforce the laws of the United States that this administration doesn't care about or doesn't agree with. We've seen the DOJ's priorities shift on a myriad of different issues, whether it's voting rights, DEI. This is just one and the same. And I will just note, because I love to point out how the Supreme Court has essentially midwifed what we have seen here. The Supreme Court has for years whittled down the scope of federal statutes that allow entities like the Public Corruptions Unit to bring cases. So last year, there was a case called Snyder versus U.S. that said essentially that it was okay to tip your public official as long as it wasn't a bribe. It was a tip, but not a bribe. Tips are okay, bribes are not. And Justice Jackson, in a dissent, wrote, "This is a decision that only this court could love." And she's right. And so
we are talking about favorable policy changes that just happen to benefit the exact people who wrote the biggest checks to causes aligned with the administration. We are talking about dropped criminal investigations, cases that were open, active, and being worked on by federal law enforcement that quietly got closed or paused in ways that connect back to the administration's political and donor network. Case after case after case, all documented, all public. This is the United States of America. This is not some authoritarian state where government contracts go to whoever the person in charge happens to like best that day. This is not some place where justice is only available to people who know the right people and can write the right check. We are supposed to be better than this. The whole foundational idea of this country is that the law applies equally, that you earn what you get.
yes, we can blame the FBI, we can blame the administration, but we should also offer a healthy dose of blame to the court that has essentially paved the way for an administration that wants to grift, that wants to be corrupt.
At some point, it stops being, though, about the courts and about the Trump administration, about us as a country. Historically, the politics of corruption have been abysmal for any Democrat or Republican. I mean, it wasn't a partisan issue. It was politically unpopular to be corrupt, to take money, bribes or tips, whatever you want to call them. Do you think that we're at sort of a post rule of law moment in this country?
1,000%.
In terms of what the public wants?
Yeah. So no, in terms of where the White House is and including the Department of Justice. I'm going to go back to Enron. Enron, a huge Fortune 10 company, implodes. It's under the Bush administration. Mm-hmm. And there was no question. I worked on the case. There was no question that that was going to be investigated and going to be prosecuted. And there was a third rail was that there would be any political interference in that case. And it didn't happen. And that I'm raising that as an example because it was a Republican administration, and that was an obvious norm.
That access to power is not just a function of how big your bank account is, that the government works for the people and not the other way around. That is the promise. What this tracker is documenting is an alleged systematic, ongoing violation of that promise at the highest possible level. Now, I want to be really clear about this. Pay-to-play accusations in Washington are not new. Wealthy donors have always had more access than regular citizens. Politicians have always, to some degree, taken care of the people who supported them. That is an ugly but unfortunately real part of how money and politics have interacted in America for a very long time. If that is all this was, I would not be making this video. What the Campaign Legal Center is documenting is something qualitatively different. It is not just access. It is not just FaceTime with the president or a seat at a fancy dinner. It is specific government benefits, pardons, appointments, policy decisions, dropped prosecutions, lining up with specific financial support in ways that a legal watchdog organization has explicitly labeled as corrupt transactions. That is a different thing. That is a much more serious thing, and it deserves to be called exactly what it is. Let's get into it, and really get into it, because most coverage of this story is moving too fast and missing the depth of what is actually here. The first thing you need to understand is what the Campaign Legal Center actually built, because the word tracker kind of undersells it. What they built is essentially a case file, a documented, organized reference catalog of alleged corrupt transactions inside the administration, published for anyone to see, updated as new information comes in, and framed explicitly in the language of corruption, not the softer language of conflict of interest, not the hedge language of appearance of impropriety. The watchdog used the word corrupt. They said these are corrupt transactions. That choice of language is deliberate, and it matters. These are legal professionals who understand exactly what words carry weight. When they say corrupt, they are not using it loosely. Now let's talk about what is actually in the tracker, because the types of benefits being documented here are not small things. We are not talking about someone getting a better seat at a White House dinner. We are talking about high-level government appointments, positions that carry real power over real policy that affects real people's lives and livelihoods. The tracker documents cases where individuals connected to the administration's political and donor network ended up in government roles that in the normal course of things, they might never have been anywhere near. But after significant financial support flowed in, suddenly the door opened. Suddenly the qualifications did not seem to matter quite as much. Suddenly the right people were making calls on their behalf. We are talking about ambassadorships. Ambassadors have historically been a mix of career diplomats and political appointees. Every administration does some of this. That part is not new. But what the Watchdog is documenting is an alleged directness, an alleged transactional quality to these arrangements that goes far beyond normal political patronage. This is not just a case of a loyal supporter getting a nice posting somewhere as a thank you. The Watchdog is documenting cases where financial support was followed by appointments in ways they have specifically called out as constituting corruption. The sequence matters. The timing matters. When you look at the documented cases, those timelines are hard to explain away. We are talking about pardons. I want to spend a moment on this one because it is the most alarming category of all. A presidential pardon is the most powerful legal tool in existence. The ability to completely wipe out someone's criminal record. No appeal, no challenge, no review, with a single signature. It is an extraordinary power. The tracker documents cases where pardons were granted in ways that line up with political money in a manner that raises serious questions about what was actually happening and why. When a pardon goes to someone who donated heavily to causes aligned with the administration, when the timing lines up in ways that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence, that is not just ethically troubling. That is the kind of thing that legal watchdogs build trackers about. Then there are the dropped investigations. This is the category that should make every person watching this genuinely angry, regardless of their politics, regardless of how they feel about anything else. This one goes directly to the question of whether the law actually means anything in this country. Criminal investigations that were underway, cases that had been opened by federal law enforcement, active cases that investigators were working on, following evidence, building files, doing their jobs, and then they just stopped. Cases paused, cases quietly closed. In multiple documented instances, the tracker connects the targets of those investigations to the administration's broader political and donor network. That is not ethically troubling. That is a justice system being deliberately used to protect politically connected individuals from accountability. That is, by any reasonable and honest definition, a corruption of the legal system itself. Now, here is where the story gets even bigger. This tracker does not exist in isolation. It connects to a much larger picture that has been building for more than a year now. Understanding that full picture is essential to understanding why this particular moment right now matters so much. Let me walk you through the other pieces. Congressional Democrats released a detailed staff report with a title that did not leave much room for interpretation. It documented how the administration and its family used cryptocurrency ventures to add what the report described as billions of dollars to their net worth while in office, while holding executive power, while making decisions that affect markets, regulations, and the entire economy. Billions while in office. The report connected this directly to foreign influence and to specific deregulation decisions that benefited the exact same entities that were pouring money into linked crypto projects. You have the president's family getting richer through financial ventures that are directly affected by the president's own policy decisions, and simultaneously foreign money flowing into those same ventures. The congressional report called it exactly what it is, a new age of corruption. Then there is the executive order story, which has been criminally underreported given how significant it is. Early in the second term, an executive order was signed that paused new investigations and enforcement actions under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. For people who are not familiar with that law, it is the federal statute that prohibits American businesses and individuals from bribing foreign government officials. It exists specifically to protect fair international competition and to prevent foreign corruption from infecting American commerce. The administration basically told the Justice Department to pump the brakes on that. ProPublica reported on what happened next. What happened next is genuinely staggering. The Justice Department dropped tens of thousands of criminal investigations, and new Foreign Corrupt Practices Act probes were put on hold, not because there was no evidence, not because resources ran out, because of a policy decision from the very top of the executive branch. A decision that just happened to benefit the class of wealthy, internationally connected individuals and corporations that populate the administration's donor donor and ally network. Now let's connect the dots, because when you lay this out in sequence clearly without spin, the picture becomes very hard to explain away. You have a watchdog tracker documenting government benefits flowing to donors, jobs, pardons, dropped cases, favorable policies. You have a Justice Department that dropped tens of thousands of criminal investigations while simultaneously pulling back from foreign corruption enforcement. You have a presidential family that, according to a congressional report, added billions to its net worth through ventures directly affected by administration policy. You have deregulation decisions and executive orders that appear specifically calibrated to benefit the same donor class, receiving all these other perks. When you lay all of that out, when you see it all in one place, it does not look like a series of coincidences. It looks like a system. That is exactly what the watchdog groups are saying it is. Here is what most people get fundamentally wrong about this story. They hear that a watchdog group is documenting it. They assume it must be partisan, and they file it under political noise. The thinking goes, Democrats are upset again. Liberal groups are doing their thing. Nothing new here. That reaction is completely understandable, given how politicized everything has become. But here's the thing. The Campaign Legal Center is not a Democratic organization. It is a nonpartisan legal watchdog funded to monitor money and politics and government ethics, regardless of which party is in power. When they say they are cataloging corrupt transactions, that is not a campaign attack. That is a professional, institutional assessment from legal experts whose entire purpose is to watch for exactly this kind of thing. When you add the breadth of the sourcing, ProPublica, The Atlantic, The New York Times, a bipartisan congressional staff report, you are not looking at a coordinated partisan smear. You are looking at independent institutions with different editorial approaches, different political leanings, and different ownership structures, all pointing in the same direction. That convergence matters. That is what a pattern looks like. The deeper issue, the one that a separate government accountability group laid out in what they called the Corruption Chronicles, is what they described as a powder keg of corruption scandals, influence peddling, and profiteering, where public office is allegedly being used to enrich insiders and punish critics. That phrase is worth sitting with. Enrich insiders and punish critics. It describes a system working exactly backwards from how it is supposed to work. Government is supposed to serve the public interest, not enrich the people in power, not protect the donors who funded their rise, not punish the people asking inconvenient questions. When accountability systems are compromised, when oversight is blocked, when investigations are dropped by the thousands, you create precisely the conditions for that backward system to flourish unchecked. The favor factory is real, it is documented, and it is active right now. This is the core of everything we have covered today. The Campaign Legal Center did not publish speculation. They published a tracker, an organized, sourced, live updating catalog of specific alleged cases where the pattern is consistent every single time. Money flows in on one end and government benefits flow out on the other. Jobs, pardons, policy wins, drop prosecutions. The people who can write the biggest checks appear to operate under a fundamentally different set of rules than everyone else. I want to address the pushback because some people are going to say, this is just how politics works. Rich donors have always had access. This is nothing new. Stop pretending it is a scandal. Here is my honest answer to that. Yes, wealthy donors have historically had more political access than average citizens. That is a real and serious problem with our campaign finance system that predates this administration by decades. But there is a meaningful, legally significant difference between access and corrupt transactions. Access means the president takes your call. Access means your industry gets some extra attention in the policy process. What the tracker is documenting is something categorically different. Specific, named cases with documented timelines where the connection between financial support and a concrete government benefit is direct enough that a nonpartisan legal watchdog has labeled them corrupt. That is not the same thing. Collapsing that distinction is how this kind of corruption survives, by hiding inside the argument that everyone does it. The justice system is being used as both a weapon and a shield at exactly the same time. This is arguably the most structurally dangerous part of the entire picture, because justice is not just about individual cases. It is about the signal the system sends about who the law applies to and who it does not. When that signal gets corrupted, the damage is deep and slow to repair. When tens of thousands of criminal investigations get dropped, when foreign corruption enforcement gets paused by executive order, when cases against well-connected individuals officials quietly disappear. And at the same time, political opponents face aggressive legal scrutiny, and critics find the machinery of the federal government pointed at them. The message being sent to the entire country is unmistakable. The law bends based on your political relationships. Here is why that matters for everyone, not just the people in those specific cases. If you run a small business and you know that your competitor can buy their way out of a federal investigation by making the right political donation, what does that do to your faith in fair competition? If you know that the justice system treats connected insiders differently from everyone else, what does that do to your sense that it is worth playing by the rules? It corrodes everything slowly, not all at once, but steadily and deeply. That corrosion is precisely what the Campaign Legal Center, ProPublica, and the congressional report authors are racing to document before it becomes so normalized that people stop noticing it at all. The 2026 midterms are the accountability mechanism, and they are right around the corner. Here is the practical political reality. As of right now, one party controls both chambers of Congress. That means the committee chairs who decide what gets investigated are not investigating this. The oversight apparatus that the Constitution created specifically to check executive power is largely not being used for that purpose. That is not an accident. That is a deliberate choice by the majority party to shield a president of their own party from accountability. November 2026 changes that math potentially. If the opposing party flips enough seats to take back the House, the committee structure flips with it. New committee chairs, new subpoena power, new investigators with actual legal authority. The tracker, this case file the Campaign Legal Center built, becomes the roadmap. Every case they have documented becomes a potential subject for a congressional investigation with teeth. Every financial connection, every pardon, every dropped prosecution, every ambassadorship tied to a donation becomes something that can be investigated under oath with witnesses compelled to testify and documents compelled to be produced. That is a massive shift. That is exactly why the stakes of the 2026 midterms go so far beyond the normal back and forth of congressional elections. I want to say something directly to voters who support the party in power because this is a conversation that deserves to happen plainly and honestly. If you believe in limited government, if you believe in equal treatment under the law, if you believe that the system should not favor well-connected insiders over ordinary, hardworking people, then what the Campaign Legal Center is documenting should trouble you. Not as a partisan matter, as a values matter. A government that hands out jobs, pardons, and legal cover based on the size of someone's check is not a conservative government. Small government conservatism is supposed to be about less power concentrated in fewer hands, not about using concentrated power to funnel favors to a donor class. The corruption allegedly documented in this tracker is not a conservative value. It is, if anything, a betrayal of conservative values. Every elected official who has stayed quiet about it is going to have to answer for that silence more and more directly as November approaches. Some will double down, some will change the subject. Maybe a few will decide this is the line they are not willing to cross. The Campaign Legal Center is going to keep updating that tracker. ProPublica is going to keep reporting. Congressional staff are going to keep writing reports. The journalists at the outlets that have been documenting this pattern are going to keep doing their jobs. The pieces of this picture are going to keep adding up case by case, favor by favor, name by name. At some point, the weight of it becomes impossible to carry for the administration, for the party protecting it, for the members of Congress who have been quietly looking the other way while the tracker grows. We may not be at that tipping point yet, but we are closer than we were at the start of this term. Every new case added to that tracker is one more step toward it. The favor factory documented in real time. Donors in, benefits out, investigations dropped, justice selectively applied, billions added to family wealth while in office, and an election cycle coming that is going to determine whether any of this ever faces real, meaningful accountability or whether it just becomes the new normal. The question is whether the American people will pay attention long enough to demand something better, whether the noise of the daily news cycle will drown out the pattern that is emerging, whether the people who are supposed to hold power accountable will do their jobs or continue to look the other way. This is not just about one administration. It is about what kind of country we want to be. It is about whether we believe in the rule of law or whether we have decided that power and money should determine who gets justice and who does not. It is about whether we still believe that the government works for the people or whether we have quietly accepted that it works for whoever can pay the most. The tracker is a tool. It is a document. It is a record. What happens with it depends on the people who see it and the people who demand accountability. The receipts are out there. The case file is public. The pattern is documented. Now it is up to the rest of us to decide whether we are going to let it slide or whether we are going to do something about it. Stay angry about this. Stay informed. The next chapter of this story is going to be written by what happens in the courts, in the Congress, and in the election that is coming. The crypto angle, the billions, the foreign money, the specific deregulation deals that made it all possible. That is the next layer of this story. It is even messier and more alarming than everything we covered today. The connections run deeper than most people realize. The money trails lead to places that will surprise you. The pattern of behavior is consistent and it is escalating. The people who are documenting it are not going to stop. The people who are enabling it are counting on you not to pay attention. The people who are benefiting from it are hoping you will move on to the next story and forget about this one. Do not let them. This is the kind of story that defines a generation. It is the kind of story that historians will look back on and ask how people reacted. It is the kind of story that determines whether a democracy survives or whether it slides into something else. The favor factory has been open for business. It is up to us to decide whether it stays open or whether we shut it down. The tools are there. The evidence is there. The accountability mechanism is coming. The only question is whether we will use them.